I never thought my career would end in the middle of Times Square, under the blinding lights and in front of a boardroom full of people who used to shake my hand with respect. 20 years of loyalty, late nights, and sacrifices were wiped away in a single sentence. The CEO looked me straight in the eye and said, almost casually, "You're done here, Marissa. We don't need you anymore." The room froze. My name flashed on the giant screen behind him, not in recognition, but with a red slash through it, like I was being erased in real time. A couple of junior managers smirked. One of them even whispered, "Finally." I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but my voice wouldn't come out. Have you ever stood in a room hearing your life collapse while everyone else pretends it's just another meeting? That was me, sitting there with a stack of papers that spelled the end of everything I had built. I wasn't just fired, I was humiliated, stripped of my worth in the city that never sleeps, in the office where I once believed hard work would protect me. And yet, as shocking as that moment was, I didn't realize it was only the beginning. Because the same contract they used to get rid of me held the very key to their downfall. Before I tell you how it all unraveled, let me ask you, where are you listening from? And on a deeper note, have you ever felt invisible at work? Like your contributions didn't matter? Leave me a comment if this story strikes a chord with you. Your words might be exactly what someone else out there needs to hear today. 20 years. 2 whole decades of my life poured into that company. And in a single afternoon, it felt like all of it had been scrubbed away, like chalk washed off a sidewalk after the rain. I used to believe dedication meant security, that if you gave everything, your time, your energy, even pieces of your health, the company would stand by you. I told myself those late nights were temporary, that missing family dinners and birthdays would pay off in the long run. I thought my loyalty would count for something. But the truth is, I missed a lot more than dinners. I missed my son's first piano recital because I was on a midnight call with a supplier in Tokyo. I missed anniversaries because I was debugging a system crash in the server room. I even remember collapsing once right there on the office floor, and instead of sending me home, they loaded me into an ambulance while a junior engineer held my laptop open next to me so I could finish a patch on the ride to the hospital. Looking back, it sounds absurd. At the time, I thought it was noble. And yet, when they decided they were moving in a new direction, all those moments, all those sacrifices meant nothing. I wasn't Marissa Hale, the architect who built the backbone of their entire system. I was just another name they could strike off a list. The part that stung the most wasn't the firing itself, it was the silence afterward. No one stood up. No one spoke out. People I had mentored kept their eyes on their laptops, pretending they hadn't seen. It was like I had already been erased before I even left the room. I sat there clutching the stack of papers that labeled me terminated, and I couldn't help but wonder, how does 20 years of loyalty vanish in less than 20 minutes? I didn't know it then, but that question would lead me down a path I never expected. One that would turn everything upside down. After the meeting, I walked out with a cardboard box in my arms. It felt almost cliché, the box with a photo frame, a coffee mug, and the scraps of a 20-year career. The elevators were silent, and every glance I caught on the way down burned like a reminder, you're no longer one of us. That night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I started flipping through the paperwork they had shoved into my hands. Page after page of sterile language, legal jargon, and signatures. I should have been numb, but instead, something kept gnawing at me. A detail, a memory. Years ago, during the chaos of a system migration, I had fought tooth and nail for certain protections in the contracts. Most people thought I was paranoid, maybe even obsessive. "Marissa, why are you worrying about things that will never happen?" one manager once joked. I didn't answer him then, but I knew better. I had seen too many talented people discarded like broken parts. So quietly, I pushed for a clause to be included, a safeguard for the architect of the system itself. Now, as my eyes scanned those dense paragraphs again, my pulse quickened. There it was, the words I had almost forgotten, buried in the fine print, overlooked by executives too eager to celebrate their fresh start. A single condition, simple but powerful, written in black and white. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. For the first time that day, the knot in my chest loosened. They thought they had erased me, but they had signed something they never understood. I closed the folder slowly, almost reverently. My fingers traced the edge of the paper as if it held a secret no one else in the building remembered. And maybe that was true. Maybe I was the only one who knew just how much weight those lines carried. What they saw as the end of my story might just be the beginning of theirs unraveling. The next morning, I returned to the office for what they called my final clearance. It was a formality: turn in my badge, hand over the laptop, clean out the last traces of my presence. I carried myself through the lobby like a ghost walking among the living. Some people glanced up, then quickly looked away, as if eye contact might make them complicit. I could hear whispers behind me. That's her. She got cut. My name, once tied to innovation and late-night rescues, now reduced to gossip. The security guard barely met my eyes when he pointed me toward the desk where I was supposed to surrender my access card. I held the badge in my palm a moment longer than I should have. That small rectangle of plastic had once felt like a key to a future I built brick by brick. Now it was supposed to be nothing more than an expired pass. Still, I slid it across the counter with a calm face, the kind of calm that comes after a storm has already taken everything. But here's the part no one expected. As I walked toward the turnstile for the last time, I swiped the badge out of habit. A faint beep echoed in the lobby, and the gate clicked open. Green light. Access granted. I froze for a second, then stepped through slowly, my pulse steady. The guard frowned, confused, but said nothing. To him, it was just a system glitch. To me, it was confirmation. Confirmation that I wasn't erased, not completely. The system still recognized me, even if the people upstairs pretended I no longer existed. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just walked out the doors onto 7th Avenue, box in hand, head held high. Let them believe I was gone. Sometimes silence is stronger than any declaration. What they didn't realize was that silence can echo louder than thunder when the moment is right. The first sign of trouble came before sunrise. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, jolting me awake. At first, I thought it was another meaningless notification, but when I saw the subject line, urgent license inactive, I sat up straight. It was from our partner in Tokyo. They weren't just asking questions. They were halting shipments, citing a clause that required my authorization. Without it, their systems wouldn't move a single unit. I stared at the message, reading it twice, 3 times almost, in disbelief. They had actually triggered the safeguard. A few hours later, another email arrived, this time from Frankfurt, then Singapore, then Toronto. Different time zones, different languages, but the same message. Operation suspended until the original system architect was confirmed. That name was still mine. Meanwhile, I imagined the scene back at headquarters. The executives probably brushed off the first message as a glitch, but as the sun climbed higher and the reports piled up, that illusion must have started to crack. The contracts weren't technical hiccups, they were binding, and they were being enforced. I could almost picture Victor slamming his fist on the conference table, demanding answers. I could almost hear Sienna scrambling for explanations, insisting everything was under control. But control was slipping quietly, methodically, hour by hour. For me, it was surreal. After being tossed aside like I didn't matter, I was suddenly the invisible thread holding the entire structure together. And now that thread had been tugged. I sat back, phone still buzzing with alerts, and let out a slow breath. It wasn't victory, not yet. but it was the sound of cracks forming in the walls they thought were unbreakable. And by the end of that day, those cracks would be impossible to ignore. By midday, the headlines were beginning to swirl. At first, Victor brushed everything off with that smug confidence he always carried. He stood in front of the cameras, polished and rehearsed, calling the disruption a minor contractual glitch. He promised investors that shipments would resume within hours. His voice was steady, his smile wide. And for a moment, the market actually believed him. Shares ticked upward. Reporters scribbled down his words as if nothing was wrong. For the executives, it must have felt like a sigh of relief, a momentary calm after the morning chaos. I could imagine them patting each other on the back, whispering about how quickly they had contained the narrative. They thought the worst had passed. But I knew better. Contracts aren't narratives. They don't bend to press releases or empty promises. They sit quietly until the moment they're enforced. And that moment was coming faster than they expected. That night, as office windows glowed against the Manhattan skyline, the second wave hit. Servers blinked red with identical alerts. Contract invalid. Authorization missing. Vendor after vendor followed suit. Montreal's largest supplier sent a blunt message that no press statement could erase. We only recognize Hail systems. The illusion shattered. The temporary boost in stock price reversed into a nosedive. Phones rang off the hook, but most calls went unanswered. Partners who had once hung on every word of Victor's strategy now kept their silence, or worse, demanded immediate proof that operations could continue without me. I sat in my apartment, phone buzzing every few minutes with updates, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not joy, not revenge, just certainty. The machine they had built without me was already grinding to a halt, and they hadn't even realized how little time they had left. And while Victor clung to his false promises, the brutal crash was only beginning. It didn't take long before the board demanded answers. By the time the week closed, shipments were frozen across 3 continents, and the stock had slipped into freefall. Investors were furious, and Victor had no choice but to call an emergency meeting. I wasn't in that room, but I know the way those meetings work. The glossy oak table, the screens glowing with red graphs, the air thick with panic disguised as strategy. Voices rising, accusations flying, and Victor pounding his fist to demand loyalty. He must have thought sheer force could hold the walls from caving in. But this time, someone else had a seat at the table, my attorney. Quiet, deliberate, carrying a slim binder no bigger than a folder. While the executives bickered about public relations and vendor management, he opened it, calmly adjusted his glasses, and slid a single page into the center of the chaos. Clause 17. The words were plain, almost unremarkable, unless you understood what they meant. If the original system architect was terminated without cause, ownership of the patents, the licenses, and the operational rights reverted back to that architect. My name was printed there in black ink. Their signatures were too. I can imagine the silence when that sank in. No shouting, no excuses, just the weight of realization. Victor probably tried to argue, to twist the language. But contracts don't bend to ego. They are read, they are enforced, and they are final. In that moment, everything shifted. The board that once treated me as disposable now saw the truth. Their empire was standing on foundations I had quietly secured years before. I wasn't in that room to see the panic spread across their faces. But I know it happened, and the world outside was about to see it too. Because what started in that boardroom was about to spill into headlines, hashtags, and a storm they couldn't control. It started with a leak. One journalist got hold of the documents my attorney placed on that boardroom table, and within hours, the headlines were everywhere. $1.2 billion patent portfolio reverts to former architect. My name, the same one they had slashed off a PowerPoint slide, was suddenly plastered across news tickers in Times Square. The story spread like wildfire. TV anchors debated it, calling it one of the most shocking corporate reversals in years. Blogs picked it up. Social media turned it into a movement. Hashtags like hashtag #BringBackMarissa and hashtag #QuietPower trended across platforms. People I had never met were suddenly standing up for me, dissecting the injustice, turning my silent walk out of that building into a symbol of resilience. Someone even posted the grainy security footage of me leaving with my box of belongings. No words, no confrontation, just a steady walk out the door. That clip went viral, captioned simply, "Strength doesn't always scream." I didn't plan any of it, but the image resonated. Millions watched, shared, commented. Meanwhile, Victor scrambled to contain the fallout. He ducked questions at press conferences, his confident smile cracking under the camera's glare. Reporters shouted, "Did you know about Clause 17? How much value just walked out with her?" His silence said more than words ever could. From my apartment, I scrolled through the chaos on my phone. It was surreal to go from erased to headline news in a matter of days. Strangers wrote to me telling me their own stories of being overlooked, undervalued, replaced. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. But this storm wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the cracks in a system that thought loyalty was disposable. And soon, the storm would hit harder than anyone expected. It didn't take long before the storm began to swallow Victor whole. The same press that once praised him as a bold, visionary leader now circled like vultures. Every network replayed clips of his earlier promises, a minor glitch resolved in hours, against the reality of collapsing partnerships and plummeting stock prices. The contrast was brutal, and the public loved to watch a king brought down. Inside the company, morale shattered. Employees whispered in the hallways, some openly packing their desks. Others leaked more information to reporters. Every decision Victor made seemed to backfire. When he tried to shift the blame to Sienna, his own protégé, the move only made him look desperate. Investors saw it, the board saw it, and worst of all, so did the employees who had once feared him. I didn't need to be there to imagine the scene. Victor, pacing in the executive suite, tie loosened, voice cracking as he shouted into a phone no one wanted to answer. The man who had humiliated me in front of the board was now the one being humiliated on the world stage. The final blow came when several of the largest shareholders issued a statement they had lost confidence in his leadership. Within a week, Victor was forced to resign. No fanfare, no graceful exit, just a quiet line in the news, CEO steps down amid controversy. For years, he had strutted through that building as if he owned it. And now he left the same way I had, with a box in his arms, his legacy reduced to headlines about failure. Watching it unfold, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something colder, something more certain. Actions have consequences, and this was only the beginning of mine unfolding. Because while Victor collapsed, I had work to do. A new chapter was waiting, one I would write on my own terms. After the dust settled, I realized I had a choice. I could disappear quietly, fade into the background of corporate history, or I could start over, not as their employee, but as my own foundation. For the first time in years, I didn't feel chained to their schedules, their demands, their endless boardroom politics. I felt free. I rented a small space in Brooklyn. Nothing flashy, just a brick loft with cracked windows and enough room for a desk, a few servers, and a coffee machine that actually worked. When I hung the simple plaque on the wall, Chief Architect Marissa Hale, I paused longer than I expected. Those words weren't a title anymore. They were a declaration. I unpacked my things slowly. A laptop, a stack of notebooks filled with sketches and designs, and a single framed picture of my son at that piano recital I had once missed. That picture reminded me what mattered now. Not status, not their approval, but building something on my own terms. On the desk, I set down an old wristwatch, the one Victor had once given me as a token of appreciation. I left it there face down, like a relic of a life I no longer wanted to carry forward. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about proving, mostly to myself, that I was more than the company's cast-off. Calls began trickling in from partners who respected what I built. People who said, if you start something new, we want to be part of it. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. And as I sat in that quiet loft with the hum of servers in the background, I realized something. This wasn't just survival. It was the foundation of something much bigger, something the world hadn't seen yet. The loft in Brooklyn was only meant to be a quiet refuge, a place where I could gather myself after the chaos. But it didn't stay quiet for long. The phone calls multiplied. First, a partner from Montreal reached out, then Tokyo, then a university in London that wanted me to lecture about system resilience. Before I knew it, my name wasn't just in the news. It was on invitations, proposals, and contracts that had nothing to do with my old company. It was strange hearing people introduce me now, not as former employee or ex-architect of anything, just Marissa Hale, a name that stood on its own. For the first time, I realized the walls of that company had been a cage, not a shield. And outside of them, there was an entire world ready to listen. Messages poured in from strangers, too. Engineers who felt invisible, single parents balancing careers and survival, people who told me, your story is my story. I started replying late at night, one by one, because I knew how much it mattered to feel heard. The more I connected, the clearer it became this wasn't just about me reclaiming what was lost. It was about showing others that being cast aside doesn't mean being finished. That sometimes the world outside the walls is bigger, brighter, and more forgiving than the world inside. And yet, even with all the support flooding in, I could feel the weight of something larger building. My fight had started as one woman against a corporation. Now it was turning into something else. A symbol, maybe even a movement. The question was no longer whether I would rebuild. The question was how far this would go and how ready I was to carry it forward. In the end, Victor was gone. His resignation came quietly, a single line buried in the business section of the paper, a far cry from the grand stage he once loved. Sienna vanished from the spotlight too, her promises of fresh leadership now nothing more than a footnote. The empire they thought they controlled had slipped through their fingers, not with an explosion, but with a slow, undeniable collapse. And me, I stood on new ground. My small loft had grown into a hub, buzzing with projects I actually believed in. The people I worked with weren't chasing quarterly numbers. They were building things with meaning, things that lasted. For the first time, my work wasn't just a job, it was a choice. Looking back, the strangest part wasn't the firing itself. It was how much silence surrounded me at first. Silence in the boardroom, silence from colleagues who once called me a mentor. It felt like abandonment. But that same silence carried me forward. It reminded me that not every fight is won by shouting. Sometimes the quietest step can shake the loudest room. Justice, I've learned, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, steady, patient, and impossible to ignore once it's heard. My story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity, about reminding myself that being discarded doesn't mean being powerless. I share this because I know I'm not the only one who's ever felt invisible, overlooked, or replaced. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you're there right now. If so, I hope my story reminds you that your silence, your patience, and your resilience can carry more power than you realize. So tell me, if you were in my position, what would you have done? And have you ever lived through something that made you realize your quiet strength?